So here's why your type 2 diabetic dog, grandmother, friend, person you had in your life who had type 2 diabetes might not be that relevant. For this one, like, part of me, I wasn't really bothered by when somebody was like, "Yeah, my grandmother died from having type 2 diabetes." And I don't want to be offensive. Like, I sympathize and I'm there with you. And the fact that this has nothing to do with my illness, it's something that's worth expressing for me, but sometimes I'll mention that, like I'll try to sneak that in, which can be rough to do or difficult or odd to do. I'll say, that, yeah, that, I mean, that's a completely different type of diabetes than I have, but wow, that's rough. I can't believe they went through that. Are you close and that sort of stuff. But when I really started tapping into this, I saw a lot of posts, like almost like top memes is like someone, they mention they're diabetic, and then first response is, "Oh yeah, my grandmother has diabetes," or "My dog has diabetes." And I think I said on an introductory video, maybe not, but you know, if your grandmother had type 1 diabetes, my heart would just be so open about that. I would be so excited to learn about it. There's so many different eras in treatment of type 1 diabetes that whatever she had been through would make her something of like a hero or a legend or a badass. Like, that stuff was rough. This was probably, like a pretty brave or strong-hearted person, and they've probably been through, maybe more sufferings or difficulties with type 1 diabetes than we do in the modern world. Maybe not, I don't know. But in general, before we had, modern CGMs even, but modern blood sugar testing devices, there's a statement from somebody who lived in that era before these, that back in that time, the only time I knew what my blood sugar was when I went low. When Dr. Bernstein is pretty famous, low carb, it's the type 1 grit community. Some people view him as extremists. I like him. I like it. I think it's cool. It's an odd, place to start. Helped me a lot early on, learn some stuff. What he described, and he was one of the first people in the country to check his blood sugar at home, because he worked for this company that sold supplies for hospitals, and he got this like trade journal where they were selling instant reading or a 1 minute reading blood glucose test device, and it was meant for hospitals, for emergency rooms. So if somebody came in passed out, they could test if they were diabetic and not drunk. So his wife was a doctor. He had his wife, use her name, and they ordered one of those devices. He started checking his blood sugar all the time, maybe early 70s, something like that. And what he found was that continually his blood sugar was going 40 to 400, like every day. He was usually about twice a day, is what he said. It just, and so today we were much less at risk for a lot of complications because of tighter management being possible with the technologies that we have. Regardless, I don't want to invalidate the feelings, the pain, the association with suffering and what it's like that the type 2 diabetic goes through. And my heart can sympathize with that, but you're really not proving that you understand anything relevant to the type 1 diabetic's life. Like, if I said to you I had AIDS or something, and you were like, "Oh yeah, I really know what it's like to go through rubella," it would be just a little bit odd. If somebody said, "I'm going through cancer right now," and you said, "Boy, I learned a lot about lupus treatment a while back," like, it's just like a little bit kind of oddballish. And especially when somebody mentions the pets, it can, for some reason, in the mental and the mental field, the type 1 diabetic community, there's a pretty like strong resistance to, somebody told me, I mentioned I was diabetic and somebody told me about their type 2 diabetic, whatever, because it's not really relevant, and it's a really fast way to, it's almost like a verification. Like, I'm wondering, is this person ignorant about type 1 diabetes or not? They mentioned the grandmother. Yes, that's the ignorant one. They don't know about type 1 diabetes. Okay, I'm going to get out of this conversation or teach something really basic and try to protect myself from the advice that's about to come. So I'm going to leave that one there. What you can do, steps from this video, I'm going to give 3 things, maybe 4. When teaching experiences about diabetics in your life, it would be really helpful to know the difference between type 1 and type 2. If you have an experience with someone who's type 1 in your life, that would be great to share, relevant. Maybe don't say something too bad. You like whatever it was. But it's relevant. But it's also fair to say, like, wow, I've never known a type 1 diabetic. That's far better than pretending you know a lot, right? Far better. The second thing, which should go without saying, is, in general, don't give advice based on what other people are doing for diabetes at all. Even if you heard about a type 1 diabetic doing something, whatever it was, for their type 1 diabetes, there's a chance you misunderstood it, got it out of context, and because there's no treatment for type 1 diabetes other than insulin, there's a good chance you're going to make yourself look like a little wackadoodle. Like, maybe there's a type 1 diabetic once who said, I really love cinnamon, or I really love eggs for breakfast. It's really good for my type 1 diabetes. And, maybe that's useful for their, like, maybe the cinnamon, maybe they had a heart condition and it helped with their circulation or something like that. But then if you go and say, well, cinnamon's good for type 1 diabetes, like, we've heard that so many times, and it's just really not relevant. So you might end up saying, like, embellishing on the truth of what the type 1 diabetic was actually doing. The type 1 diabetic that ate eggs for breakfast, maybe it's just like a regular person was saying they like eggs for breakfast. Maybe that type 1 diabetic who said eggs for breakfast is really good for me, maybe the week before they were eating 3 bagels for breakfast and it was making their blood sugar go high. And so they were doing something for that time worked for them. It wouldn't really be fair to say that that's a treatment protocol for type 1. So to get into the subtleties of managing, insulin dosing and blood sugar, my advice would be stay out of the advice column work. It's probably not going to be that good for you with a conversation with a type 1 diabetic. Like, even the conversation, like, do you think there's any cures or any good things that you can do to manage your type 1 diabetes, sounds stupid. Because for type 1 diabetic, it's like, yeah, insulin, period. Like, nothing else. If you're getting into the subtleties of managing complication. But, like, really, it's almost like what you should be saying is, like, aside from your type 1 diabetes, what do you like for your health? What do you do for your health? Oh, yeah, I do yoga, I go running, I do all this stuff. For your diabetes, what do you do for your health? Insulin, period. Full stop, There's really nothing else. So I'm going to give a third. Part of the type 2 diabetes being offensive is just bringing about this end story. Like, okay, I'll tell you a funny one. It's a little bit revealing here. Part of why I stopped seeing an endocrinologist who mainly focused on type 2 patients, and when I was first diagnosed, I was 23. So I'm like, at this point, 24, getting into health. I'd say I was super healthy. Like, I was doing a lot of stuff after my type 1 diabetes diagnosis. I got a master's in nutrition, and I'm like, my A1C is normal. I'm like 5.1. I'm like crazy good. The first time I had one of those A1Cs, my doctor thought something was wrong with the test. And I'm like, I'd get flying colors on any exam you wanted to do. And this guy is like, when I went to the office, when I talked to him, I didn't get the feeling that he really cared about my health, that he was really connecting with me, that he wanted to know anything about what I was doing, to get that, A1C without any lows, and I was so happy about it and excited about it. And he kind of wrote it off in an insulting way. And then he started to try to sell me drugs. He's like, pill pusher. He's trying to talk me into, he mentioned like Viagra, which I'm like 24 and jubilant healthy, and it's like, I never went back to his office again. So he was speaking to something that's way more severe than anything that's relevant to me. So don't talk about someone's death in your first conversation with a type 1 diabetic who has much life left to live. I get it. If you're a type 1 diabetic who is going through some complications, whatever, it is good to be sympathetic and maybe relate those stories at that point. But it's kind of like saying to a healthy person randomly, hey, you could die soon, right? Like, it's not really, So just be careful with those stories. I'm not saying they're not relevant, but type 1 diabetes community online doesn't seem to like them. Yeah, last thing, be nice if a type 1 diabetic tells you off, and do your best to learn why. You might learn a lot about what it's like to live this invisible illness where you're going through so much stuff and nobody can see it, and you have to do all these things every day, and you don't get any credit for that. There's not like a golden star sticker that you get when you eat a good breakfast and the math works out perfectly, Although on one of the type 1 diabetes forums online, you'll post like, I had a perfect, whatever blood sugar today and it's been crappy for 3 weeks. You'll get like hundreds of likes, hundreds of responses just to congratulate you. So there is like, in our community, it's like, oh, that's sweet, cool, nice work. It's hard work. Excuse me. So if you're not actually asking, where someone's coming from, it might be a little bit presumptive to jump into really deep conversations like that, about death, without really knowing them. So try to share with something that's relevant. If you're going to share something from your life experience, please don't bring up your diabetic dog and all this other stuff. Just because the word diabetes is in the name, not fucking relevant to us. That's what I'd like to share. Thanks.